What's the difference between a project that feels effortless and one that leaves everyone chasing files and status updates? It's not the tool, it's the system behind it. And most teams don't realize they're missing a few simple building blocks. Today, I'll show you how to create an interconnected project structure in Microsoft Teams using SharePoint and Power Automate that makes project visibility automatic instead of manual, and why setting this up the right way from the start changes everything. Why most project systems collapse within 90 days. Why do so many teams start strong but quickly slide back into chaos? The excitement at the beginning is real. You launch a fresh workspace, everyone agrees it's going to be the organized project this time, and channels start filling with conversations. Tasks get dropped into planner boards, files make it into the right folder, and people actually post updates in threads instead of sending emails. For a short while, it feels like the team finally solved the coordination problem, like the right tool unlocked a better way of working. But that sense of order rarely lasts. Within a couple of months, the bright start fades, and suddenly you're asking yourself why things look exactly like the last system that failed. The most common slide usually starts small, maybe a single document that someone couldn't find, so they dropped it into chat instead of uploading it. Or a new person joins the project and is confused about which channel or tab is current, so they create their own folder structure. Within weeks, the clean setup starts to sprout duplicates. The document library has 10 different final versions, each hiding in different corners. Chat threads drift into mini project logs, while the supposed central tracker stops reflecting what the team is actually doing. Everyone has good intentions, but the snowball effect is real. Unclear updates lead to side conversations, which lead to contradictory data, which eventually leads back to the exact confusion you thought you solved at the start. Sound familiar? Teams' channels that were supposed to be focused work streams turn into sprawling chat rooms that bury critical information. SharePoint libraries that were set up with neat categories end up buried under personal subfolders and one-off uploads. You go looking for a key file and you're faced with copy of presentation, Final 3, and PPTX in multiple places, none of which you can be sure is the right one. The structure is still there in theory, but the day-to-day use of it doesn't reflect that design anymore. Now, here's the reality most teams don't want to admit. The collapse isn't because you didn't pick the right app. It's not that Teams is missing a magic feature or that SharePoint isn't intuitive enough. Research into project management failures consistently shows the bigger issue is system design, not tool choice. Tools only enforce behavior if there's a system that guides how they will be used as a whole. Without it, every project becomes another round of learning the same lessons through trial, error, and frustration. There's a difference between short-term habits and long-term structure. Starting strong often relies on habits. People remember to upload files, they check the planner board, they reply in the right channel. But habits fade under pressure. Once deadlines heat up or the team scales past the original group, people fall back into the fastest way of working, even if that means clutter, duplication, and confusion. Short-term habits keep you disciplined only as long as energy is high. Structure, however, doesn't depend on people remembering. A well-designed structure makes the right action easier than the shortcut, so discipline doesn't have to be a daily choice. And what's the hidden cost when there isn't structure? Hours vanish into searching for documents that should have been centralized. Tasks are logged twice in separate trackers, which means work gets repeated or handoffs are missed. Updates come late, or worse, they contradict each other, so leaders make decisions based on outdated information. Over time, the cost adds up, not only in wasted effort, but in slower progress, higher stress, and lower trust across the team. Everyone feels like they're working hard because they are, but the actual system multiplies inefficiency instead of eliminating it. So why do some teams manage to keep their systems running smoothly while most collapse in under 3 months? The answer is that they don't treat the tool itself as the fix. They don't assume new channel equals new workflow. They design principles first. Principles give a framework that shapes how the team uses the tool, rather than leaving it as a blank canvas that slowly falls apart. Without principles, the tool is just a series of folders, chat windows, and dashboards waiting to be misused. With them, even if tools evolve or change, the core system continues to function because it's built on rules of organization rather than assumptions of behavior. That's the real shift. Stop starting with the tool and start starting with the principles. Once those guiding principles are clear, the tool simply supports them, rather than trying to force structure after the fact. That's also where most teams miss the mark. But the good news is those principles aren't complicated. In fact, there are 3 that consistently show up in lasting project systems, and that's exactly where we're heading next. The 3 principles of building a durable project system. What actually makes a project system last past the honeymoon phase? Every new setup feels organized at first, but most slip into familiar chaos. The difference comes down to whether there are guiding principles in place before the first channel is even created. Without them, the system grows around whatever feels most urgent, and urgency rarely leads to something sustainable. Teams under pressure will always choose shortcuts, quick chats, private folders, duplicate trackers, and once those become habits, no amount of tool configuration can bring the system back in line. That's why principles come before structure. You don't draft floor plans after moving furniture into a house, and you don't choose collaboration tools without deciding how information will flow. Many teams confuse their current urgency with long-term needs. They design around what feels critical today. You're launching a campaign, onboarding new hires, rolling out a product feature. The immediate demands shape the system, but those demands aren't permanent. A setup designed only around today's problem becomes useless or painful as soon as the context shifts. That's where the collapse starts. Instead, a durable system is built on three principles that don't change, even as projects and teams evolve. The first principle is having one source of truth. In Microsoft 365, that backbone is SharePoint. It functions as the database behind every project, files, lists, and records structured with consistency. That doesn't mean Teams has no role, but Teams should reflect data stored in SharePoint rather than being the storage itself. When SharePoint is treated as the foundation, the team always knows where the definitive version of a document, task, or record lives. The moment you allow for multiple sources, you invite divergence. Files edited in chat, tasks tracked in Excel, parallel folders in OneDrive. One source of truth prevents that split, and it provides an anchor for every integration the system needs later. The second principle is minimal duplication. Duplication isn't just annoying, it drains hours from every week. If a project manager has to update 3 separate places every time something changes, they either delay updates or prioritize one location, leaving the others inconsistent. Instead, the system should be designed so that automation carries updates forward. A document approval in SharePoint automatically posts in Teams. A task progression triggers status changes in the tracker without manual edits. Reducing manual duplication isn't just about efficiency. It prevents the confusion of wondering whether the spreadsheet, the board, or the chat message is correct. Automation builds reliability into the system by syncing data through design, not memory. The third principle is visibility without micromanagement. Most dashboards accidentally encourage the opposite. They give managers lists of overdue tasks and incomplete items, which leads to chasing individuals for answers. That might show activity, but it doesn't show whether the project is actually on track. Good visibility comes from the way information is structured and connected, not from monitoring every keystroke. Transparency should show trends, dependencies, and risks. It should highlight where attention is needed at the system level, rather than pulling managers into daily task policing. When oversight is built into the design, the team feels trusted and leaders make decisions based on real project health instead of scattered updates. Now, how do these 3 principles look in practice compared to the usual just create a channel approach? A common scenario is a new project channel with folders labeled docs, presentations, and final deliverables. It feels reasonable, but in practice, people still upload files into chat, create duplicate folders, and forget to update the main tracker. Compare that with a system rooted in principles. SharePoint housing, a structured project library tagged by metadata, automation pushing updates into Teams when statuses change, and a dashboard pulling real-time health metrics across projects. The difference isn't a fancier setup, it's an intentional structure that eliminates fragile habits. In adoption research and case studies, the teams that succeed long-term aren't the ones with the flashiest channel setup. They're the ones that standardize rules across projects. SharePoint isn't treated as an afterthought, it's the base layer. Automation isn't a bonus, it's the method to enforce consistency. Dashboards aren't surveillance, they're a pulse check. Those practices require discipline upfront, but the payoff is a system that actually gets stronger the longer it's in use. Tools become infrastructure, not experiments. By following these 3 principles, Teams stops being another short-term fix. It becomes a front end to an adaptive system designed to last beyond the next deadline. With the right foundation, your tools finally do what they were supposed to do all along: reduce noise, surface clarity, and support actual progress. And the question now is how to translate these principles into structure. That starts with deciding where the core data should live, and that's where SharePoint becomes the engine of the system. Structuring SharePoint as the source of truth. If Teams is the collaboration front end, then where should the actual data live? This is the part where most people default to the obvious answer and say, well, in Teams, of course. After all, it looks like everything is stored there. Channels have folders, you can upload documents, you can even create wikis. But in practice, this assumption is what creates the cascade of clutter that eventually sabotages the system. Teams is the conversation hub, but it was never intended to serve as the system of record. When files spread out across Teams, OneDrive, and even lingering email attachments, what started as a simple collaboration space quickly becomes a search problem nobody has time to solve. You've probably seen this firsthand as someone uploads the latest report into the channel's Files tab, while another person drafts edits in their personal OneDrive and emails it around. A few weeks later, you're juggling 4 slightly different versions. Nobody's sure which one is the final, and even if you manage to find the right copy, half the context is stuck in private chat threads. It only takes a handful of these cases before the entire project loses trust in the original setup, and people revert to shortcuts like emailing files or creating their own ad hoc storage. The misunderstanding comes from assuming that Teams is also the storage system. Technically, the files surface in Teams, but behind the scenes, they are still stored in SharePoint. When you click on the Files tab in a channel, it's pointing to a SharePoint document library. The problem shows up when people don't recognize that underlying structure and treat teams like a file drive. That's when silos emerge. A few files get parked in private OneDrive folders, while others are dumped directly into chat threads, which leaves them stranded with no metadata, no governance, and no link back to the main project. What looks like efficiency at the moment actually splinters the system into unconnected parts. This is why the design decision really matters. SharePoint should be treated as the backbone of the entire project system. Think of it less like a folder structure and more like a database. Instead of random folders labeled draft or version 2, you can create a library tagged with metadata, project name, client, document type, last updated owner. Search becomes reliable because the system isn't depending on people to guess the right folder name, but instead organizes files with attributes. That structure also scales. You don't end up with 20 nested folders, where the only way to find something is by knowing the exact path. Metadata lets different people discover the same document from different angles. So here's the real question: what belongs in SharePoint and what belongs in Teams? The answer is less about features and more about purpose. SharePoint holds the authoritative data, documents, structured project lists, formal records. It's where you want the official version of everything to live. Teams, on the other hand, holds the conversations that give those documents context. Quick questions, clarifications, back and forth discussions. If someone wants to know why a decision was made, the context is in Teams. If they need the actual deliverable, it's in SharePoint. The system becomes clear because each tool has a defined role instead of overlapping into chaos. And here's the twist. This isn't just about making things easier to find. Structuring the backbone in SharePoint also enables things you don't see right away. Audit trails, governance compliance, automation triggers. You can't audit a file that only exists as an attachment in a private chat thread. You can't build a workflow around an update trapped in someone's inbox. But if it's in SharePoint, the system inherently supports version control, triggers for automation, and consistent labeling for policies. That one decision to treat SharePoint as the engine instead of the storage afterthought unlocks everything else you build on top of it. That's the real payoff. SharePoint isn't just file storage. It's the structured layer that keeps your projects consistent, reliable, and capable of scaling. Teams handles the human conversations, but SharePoint ensures the system has a brain rather than a pile of documents. Once this foundation is in place, you can stop relying on people to remember every update. Instead, you can hand that responsibility off to the system itself. From there, the natural next step is moving from static data into dynamic workflows, and that's where Power Automate comes in. Making updates automatic with Power Automate. What if project updates could literally post themselves? Imagine not having to chase people for the latest status or wonder whether a tracker was actually updated. Instead of waiting for someone to remember, the system just does it. That might sound a bit futuristic, but that's exactly what Power Automate makes possible when it's tied into SharePoint and Teams. The difference between a manual system and an automatic one isn't minor. It's often the leap between a project that feels like constant catch-up and one that runs smoothly in the background. Think about the two different realities. In the manual version, you're sending reminders, people are forwarding emails, and then someone finally updates the central tracker, usually at the end of the week. By that time, the information is already out of date and decisions are based on stale data. Compare that to a system where the update is triggered the moment a piece of work is approved or shifted to the next stage. Instead of relying on memory, the system itself carries the change forward. Suddenly, the project doesn't depend on how disciplined individuals are. It depends on workflows you've already locked in. Now, not every Power Automate trigger is actually useful. Some can flood your team with constant noise. You've probably seen someone go overboard and set up flows where every single file upload spams an entire channel, drowning out the actual conversations. That's the danger of treating automation like a novelty. The real strength doesn't come from flashy workflows that impress people once and then get muted. The value is in choosing triggers that solve friction points, updates that no longer need to rely on human effort. The risk of creating noise is real, and it's just as damaging as having no automation at all. The hidden cost of leaving things manual is bigger than it looks. Every time an update is missed or delayed, the chain of information gets weaker. A single late update can ripple into misaligned tasks, duplicated work, or even wrong decisions. Ineffective status reports aren't just frustrating, they carry a cost in real dollars. Here's a simple way to see it. Multiply the average time it takes someone to post a routine update by the number of people on your team and then stretch it over weeks. Even a modest number looks heavy fast. For example, 5 minutes spent updating a tracker twice a week, multiplied across a team of 10 ads up to over 16 hours a month gone. That's essentially 2 full days of work wasted on typing information the system could have passed along automatically. So what does a valuable workflow actually look like? Picture a document going through approval in SharePoint. As soon as the status changes, a trigger posts an update into the Teams channel saying the document is approved and ready for use. At the same time, the project status field in SharePoint updates automatically to reflect the milestone. Nobody had to send a reminder, draft an email, or log into the tracker. The update became visible at the exact moment it happened. That's the kind of flow that eliminates lag and creates confidence in the system without adding any noise. From a business perspective, this is where the ROI becomes clear. Yes, setting up a flow takes time, and it might take an hour to build and test a reliable approval workflow, but compare that investment with the wasted hours added up across months of project work. The payoff isn't abstract, it's tangible and measurable. Automation doesn't just make life easier for the project manager, it reduces the hidden labor cost baked into every manual update. But it's worth remembering that automation itself can become a problem if it's scattershot. Over-automation creates endless alerts, duplicated notifications, and confusion about what to pay attention to. The key is choosing meaningful triggers, the ones tied to actual project milestones or decisions. Anything less just turns into background noise that people end up ignoring. The strongest systems build only what's essential, then scale carefully with genuine needs. At its core, automation isn't optional anymore. It's the backbone of real-time visibility in a project system. Without it, you will always rely on human willpower to keep information current. With it, the system takes on the burden and lets the team focus on actual work. Once data flows reliably from SharePoint into Teams and updates are automatic rather than manual, the next question becomes, what's the value of all this visibility for leaders trying to steer the project without slipping into micromanagement? Visibility without micromanagement. How do you keep oversight without making the team feel watched? It's a question every project lead has faced. Managers want confidence the work is moving forward, but nobody likes the feeling that every keystroke might be checked. Striking the balance is tricky because traditional tracking methods lean too far in one direction. Either you drown leaders with so much raw data that patterns get lost, or you reduce updates to task-by-task snapshots that encourage micromanaging. Neither version builds trust, and both put unnecessary friction between the people doing the work and the people responsible for guiding it. The problem feeds itself because of the way dashboards are usually designed. When there's no system behind the scenes to structure the data, reporting tools can only surface what's being manually fed into them. That often leads to dashboards that look impressive but provide poor insight. You'll see lists of overdue tasks, incomplete checkboxes, or counts of files created. On paper, it shows activity. In practice, it leaves leaders asking more questions than it answers, and the fastest way to fill those gaps is to start chasing down individual team members for updates. That's when oversight crosses the line into micro-tracking routines, which doesn't improve outcomes, it just makes people defensive. And the tension comes from how both sides of the project experience the reporting. Teams want freedom to focus on execution without constant interruptions. Leaders want certainty that risks are spotted early and milestones are realistic. Those needs feel like opposites, freedom versus control. But the truth is it doesn't have to be a trade-off. When structure and automation carry information through the system automatically, leaders get clarity without having to schedule endless check-ins, and workers don't feel like they're reporting into a black hole. The oversight happens by design, not by surveillance. Let's take a concrete example. When SharePoint is treated as the structured source of truth and Teams carries the conversations, the resulting data is already clean. By linking that data into Power BI, you can build project health dashboards that update in real time. Instead of showing 100 tiny tasks, the dashboard can highlight patterns, which milestones are slipping, whether dependencies are stacking up, or where bottlenecks are forming. You end up with oversight based on actual signals rather than on guesswork or individual reports. Nobody had to be chased for an update because the automation carried the information to the dashboard. The difference in perspective here is huge. Task-level dashboards encourage managers to monitor progress by hovering over each person's mini to-do list. System-level dashboards flip the lens. They let managers see that Phase 2 deliverables are drifting 2 days later each week, or that approval cycles are getting stuck with the same stakeholder. That type of visibility isn't about control over each action. It's about finding the themes that could threaten the entire timeline. Leaders can spend energy solving the systemic issue instead of policing daily activity. This has a side effect people don't recognize until they've lived through it. The best oversight is almost invisible. When workers don't notice how status is being tracked, they stop feeling pressure to perform for the dashboard, and they just work, and the system captures milestones, risks, and completions as they naturally occur. Leaders see the information flowing in, make decisions, and adjust course, all without staging a weekly ritual where the team pauses progress just to feed a report. Oversight functions best when it's an ambient part of the system, not another layer of administrative weight. And here's a subtle but important point. Micromanagement isn't usually the sign of a controlling manager. It's often the symptom of a system that doesn't provide useful visibility. When leaders can't see project health at the right altitude, their only option is drilling down into the weeds, which looks and feels like micromanagement. Building the right structure fixes this. Metrics should exist for decisions, not for control. That's the payoff of structured systems with automation baked in. Confidence for leaders, freedom for teams. Once you see how visibility can be built into the system itself, it circles back to the bigger theme of why this approach works. The projects that last aren't the ones propped up by carefully written rules or promises to check the tracker. They're the ones with system-first thinking, where every tool is aligned to principles that outlive pressure, context shifts, and even personnel changes. That's why stepping back to design structure before layering tools changes everything about how projects survive and scale. The real win isn't setting up another shiny project channel. It's creating a system that outlives any single project, one that still works when deadlines shift and new people join. Tools will change, but structure stays. Here's your challenge. Audit your current setup. Ask if you have one source of truth, if duplication is minimized, and if visibility happens without micromanagement. Then pick one high-impact update flow to automate this week. And if you're curious where this is headed, keep an eye out. We'll be exploring how advanced AI integrations in Microsoft 365 push these systems even further.